Hello, friends. Welcome back to the channel. And today we have our guest, Mr. Vasik Bhamla, with me. Primarily, I've been observing the LinkedIn post and the LinkedIn news feed, as well as some of the YouTube channels and the contents that have been displayed there. And many people have approached me in the past few weeks with regards to some of the topics that are hot in the software industry. And many people, especially the beginners, face some kind of hiccups when they come to start with this kind of learning these kind of things. So we thought of creating a session, and maybe we'll try to put in more videos on this in the upcoming having upcoming sessions and putting up no more videos around the topics like software test automation, what is automation frameworks, what are different automation tools that can be used while automating web applications, mobile applications, then API testing, and what are the different tips and tricks and techniques that can be applied to some of the things that we do on our day-to-day daily activities with regards to writing the scripts for automation testing, performing manual automation testing, or some kind of other testing job that we do. So primarily this session we thought of recording would be more focused on automation framework, since it's the most hot and the popular topic in the software industry. Everyone one or the other time have to go through this kind of topic, like different automation tools they prefer for kind of web automation, API automation, or mobile automation. Right. So Vasik been a very having a very rich experience in the test automation, since he himself have created around 4 or 5 test automation frameworks for web, mobile, API test, and so on. And recently we are working together on one of an automation framework called Boica framework. I will be sharing the links for that GitHub repository as well as the website and the documentation in the link below. Do please check out the repository as well as the framework. And we have started one series of performing different automation test writing, how to write automation test using Boica framework, that would be uploaded to Vasik's channels. So please subscribe to Vasik's channel as well as go through those videos as well. You will find more interesting stuff out there. But coming back to the session that we have for today, it's more around automation framework. So what's an automation framework? What is an test automation framework ideally? So it's I've seen many people getting confused while answering this set of questions. Maybe Vasik, you might also have experienced that thing in your when you have taken some kind of interviews with folks who are around 3 to 5 years of experience, maybe more than 8 years as well. And when you ask them a simple definition with regards to what is an automation framework, and you hear different sorts of answers, like it's a kind of a set of rules, it's a guideline, some principles, coding standards, and blah 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 and so on thing. So it's a very pretty much simple definition, like a test automation framework is a kind of a coding practices, or a set of rules and guidelines that can be applied to make your code more robust, have more reusability around the code, maintainability, writing test scripts, making the things difficult, which are things which are making it difficult, making them more simpler, and actually cutting out the extra boilerplate code from whatever things that we have, from the raw things to write the automation scripts from. Maybe Vasik, you can share some more points on this around what's the test automation framework according to your perspective and your angle.
Yeah, so most of the things which you told, like it's already covered many things. But
Mhm.
if I go with my perspective and the way which I think the automation framework is really is basically we normally what we do we uh, create some helper methods which normally there is a code duplication thing. We try to reduce that by adding some helper method, and we create all those helper methods and we call that as a framework. So
Mhm.
normally, like in most of the companies, they do that way only. They create many helper methods that try to reduce the code duplication, and they call it as a framework. So normally, like what you can summarize is that automation framework is mostly most usable commands which we wrap in methods and we expose them to be used in our test cases. And it
Oh,
also covers like all the configurations, like config files, property files, and all that data management. Like, most of the companies use Excel for data management, test data. and many companies use JSON file, YAML file, and all these things they are like encapsulated in a single project, and we call that as a framework for that company.
Yeah. So basically, there's no a kind of a mandatory rules for automation framework. It is basically a kind of a guideline which helps in reducing the complexity and making the scripting easier. So
Yes.
ideally, if you put around a person who is a fresher or maybe 1 or 2 years of experience in the industry, and you want him to write the code using that framework, so it should be so much simpler for him that it should be a piece of cake for him to write the
Yeah.
framework, and you don't have to sit there behind him and make him understand. So this particular method does this kind of actions, or uh, how do you interact with the elements, and how do you find out run the test on Chrome on different browsers, how do you run the test in parallel, and so on. It should be a
Hmm.
piece of cake. By looking at the framework or the existing scripts, it should help that person to run the test or write the test easily,
Hmm. So
right?
mostly what happens is like newcomers, they most of the new means the new team members might that it is possible that they don't know what how Selenium works, or they don't have enough experience with Selenium or APM. So with the framework in place, what happens is the learning curve is reduced for them. So they don't need to learn the Selenium directly. They just need to understand the framework and use that. And the only thing is they need to understand the locating strategies, like how to locate the elements of the using Selenium and API. So their learning curve is also reduced, and they can be more productive if the proper framework is in place for that project.
Correct, correct. And to begin with, like we already had shared some lights regarding what is an automation framework, what is a test automation framework, and so on. And but the thing here is, which I feel is most important in beginning with an test automation framework is, what is the problem statement actually? Understand the problem statement first, right? Like what
Yes.
problem you are facing and what do you want to solve? You are mentioning something, Vasik. Please go ahead.
No, no. Yes.
Okay, so my concern was with regarding any of the test automation framework is, we should look closely what problem statement we have and how it will be solved by creating that automation framework, rather than just jumping on the things to create an automation framework. Like we are working as a team, let's create our own framework and do it this way, that way. Why do you want to reinvent the wheel when you already have some kind of solution available in the open source or in the market, maybe commercial as well? If that's solving your problem, you can directly use it, right? And why do you want to write everything from sketch every time and waste time and efforts as well as your team's capability as well? So if your team is capable to write an end-to-end test by using some of the open source framework which are readily available, use it directly, write the test, and like knock it off. That might save a lot of efforts with respect to testing and releasing your quality product in the market, uh, or the staging, or whatever environment you want to move on to, right?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it is pretty common actually in the nowadays. If you see in many companies, in my past experience also, I've seen like they just go ahead and like let's write our own framework. They don't like they don't like to explore the uh, open source field and see like how many open source projects which are there which they can use. They don't try to do that. And mostly there is a pattern over here. If you see, like if there are companies using Java, they will prefer to create their own framework. They don't want to explore the market. And if they are using JavaScript, they will go like let's use Playwright, let's use WebDriver IO. They don't want to invest any efforts in creating a framework over there. So there are like targeted languages which the company thinks, let's create a framework over there, or let's use this particular framework if they are using like JavaScript or TypeScript. So these some things which companies are also like I don't know where like they are not clear with their vision, like which exactly what purpose they have for which they are requiring an automation framework. So they need to be clear in their vision, like exactly why their automation framework should be developed and what problem will it solve. They should look into that things and visualize from end to end, like from the starting, like why the automation framework we need, which language we need to write that automation framework, how our tests will be written, how our tests will be executed, how will the test will be executed in CI, how we will get the reporting from the CI to CI pipeline, and how we will get the logs. How if anything's fail, how our team will be able to debug that thing. So all these things, company should visualize and then come up with the proper strategy to create an automation framework.
Right. So, as we talked about uh, the problem statement, the next point that came to my mind was the approach, which you figured out very well. Like, what approach should we take to create that automation framework, or actually what approach should we look out for if there's an already solutionized automation framework available in the market that we are going to use. So that approach, maybe how would we solve that problem statement that you are facing? Is there really a problem? So most of the time, what I have seen in my personal experience is there are a lot of solutions available in the market, right? So if there's solution available in the market, what is the problem actually that you're going to solve? Many people overcome, or many people overlook this kind of question, like they don't have a problem yet they want a solution to be implemented. So if there's
Hmm.
no problem, why do you want to make the things complex by implementing some kind of framework which will actually not suit your uh, actual environment, the working environment? Because most of the time it is seen like when you implement some kind of framework, and that person who has implemented that framework, if he leaves the organization, the whole team comes to a toss. And again, there comes a time after 6 to 8 months that you again have to rewrite the whole thing, and again you waste those kind of efforts to create a framework from scratch. Now this actually, like initially you actually took 2 months to create that framework, that person left, again you took 2 months, so ideally you have invested 4 months, and what ROI did you get over that? That needs to be justified as well, right?
Hmm.
So if you see 4 months, you would have implemented a whole end-to-end test journey, or maybe implemented a test pyramid in place, which would have eventually like cordoned off all your problems from the pipelines, CI/CD pipelines till the unit testing as well. So instead of creating an automation framework, why not create a kind of a robust process inside your application or in the CI/CD pipeline itself, where you look on for the different types of test pyramid components, like applying unit testing, integration testing, component testing, catching the bugs earlier, early feedback, fast feedback, fail fast scenarios. These are a lot of the things that we can implement in the overall quality process, which is normally overlooked, and people focus just on the test automation framework because they want to automate and regress, do a kind of regression testing on all of the stuff that are present in the plate right now, right? So have you ever faced this kind of issue in your experience as well?
Yeah, actually, I have seen like many times company the teams normally what they do, they try to over complicate the things by implementing some tools which they are not necessarily required. For example, if the non-technical team member are involved in the testing part as well. For example, BA gives you stories which has like a gherkin kind of a scenario mentioned in the story. Then it makes sense to go with Cucumber also,
Hmm,
because that way they'll write the scenarios for us and we just automate those scenarios.
hmm,
Now I have seen many companies what they do, just because Cucumber has a pretty good impression in the market, so they just go with Cucumber. Let's implement the Cucumber, and they don't realize that there is no technical team member who is writing scenarios for them. So the tester themselves have to write the scenarios. They have to maintain feature files. They have to maintain the step definition files, and there is like one layer of overhead now while writing the test cases. That is not required in this. And another thing I've seen is like they go with karate, for example. Now, the karate is very good for API automation. Like it helps easily writing test cases if the team member relatively new with the programming.
hmm.
So now I have seen like some companies, they what they do, they mix programming into Gherkin, and now writing their coding inside the Gherkin files. Now does that make any sense? I'm not sure, but no, these things happen. Like company does not realize the purpose of what they want to do exactly. They just go ahead and implement things just because of the popularity of the tool.
Yeah, and it actually makes the things complicated, because if the person who are working on the test, and he doesn't have that much amount of experience to understand the things which are too complex, it might be a case that the whole framework that we have implemented might fail. People will not be very much hands on that framework. Only the people who created that, who knows implementation, maybe one or two people from the 8 to 10 member of team, those 2 3 people only know them. And what happens is this the remaining 8 6 7 8 people have to approach them daily for the problems they are facing with the framework, which actually frustrates the people who have implemented and written the framework, stating that this is already implemented, you need to follow the steps. But every scenario has a different step, right? Everything has a different perspective to look upon. That particular person who is a junior or a fresher from the market, or maybe 4 to 5 years of experience, who haven't worked on those kind of scenarios before, you need to educate them to the stuff that you have implemented, provide proper documentation that actually leads them to writing the scenarios, implementing the scenarios, or locating the scenarios, or writing like you mentioned, a gherkin query. How do you write that? I myself, I haven't got any chance, much many like I haven't got any chance to work on the gherkin language or the cucumber things like that, but I know how the things work out there. When where do you need to implement that? But I have also seen scenarios where cucumber was implemented, but not a single time the BA would open that feature or the step definition file and see what's written in out there. Now this is an overhead expense for the QA team there, because it's of no use. You just execute the scenario that can be executed plainly using the test. You write the test cases as well, you write the gherkin file as well, you write the step definition file as well. Why do you need this kind of overburden there? And when asked, like, it's popular, if you need to implement it, that management wants it, that's it. That's the answer I've heard in my career experience as well. And that actually burns out the QA team, or maybe the development team as well, if they are also participating in writing the test as well. So this is a very good point. Like, we need to check out for the approach that we are taking to implement those scenarios, or whatever approach that we have, what problem statement we are facing, how do we implement that, how do we actually solve them. And here comes the need to have the team discussion here. Most of the time it is seen, in my experience, I've most of the time seen that it's a purely one or two individuals decision to implement a kind of a framework or create a kind of framework, and those 2 3 members just decide and just implement the framework. Now the team is not aware of the team's capability, the team's tech stack information, everything is at toss. They don't know. So if they are implementing a JavaScript framework, most of the team members that have is experienced Java people. They are not worked on JavaScript anymore, and this leads to, this is not a immediate failure, but it's a kind of indirect failure, which will come eventually come up after 2 or 3 months, right?
Yes.
So
So
this
there are
also, yeah.
plenty of there are one more points which are coming in my mind. Like I have also seen, many organizations they overcomplicate the framework itself. Like they are trying to really reduce the team burden by creating some easy to use framework. But I have seen companies they create a framework to complicate the things. Like they it is pretty difficult for a newcomer to even use the framework like from day one. They need to have a separate learning curve to understand what the framework actually means. And there are like some things, some organizations, they have some people who are creating the framework and they just create the framework on their own. They don't get the try to get the feedback from the team, like you mentioned. Like, you should work as a team together and get the feedbacks from the team. Like, if at the end of the day, you are not writing the test, you are just creating the framework, right?
Hmm.
They will be writing the test, so you should take proper feedback from them. Like, is this like easy to understand? So the framework should be such easy that you will require documentation very minimum. You don't need to constantly keep a documentation open on the side to work on the framework. Like I've seen this in my experience. Like, like we have to just create a open documentation and start working. Like what is happening, we don't know. Why this method is used, we don't know. There's just that it is created like that to increase the complexity.
Yeah, but sometimes I've seen it solves the problem as well. Though it's not a complex issue, people can
Hmm.
create their own problem. No problem, no worries on that front as well. But the thing is, the team should be kept in place. Like they should be taking different opinions from the team members out there. Like we can consider the following points, which can be brainstormed at the time of a text stack description or a text stack decision. While discussing the tech stack within the team members, I think we can talk about the points related to programming language that can be used, which tool can be used, like open source or a commercial tool, and should the framework be in the same language as the language is built in, or the application it is built in. So for example, if the application is built in JavaScript, why not go ahead and write the framework in JavaScript itself? So that in this case, what happens is we can take the leverage from the developers also, if they want to contribute to the test automation framework, or if they want to write, if they are free from if they don't have any kind of a complex task with them, they can help the QA team members write the test as well, and this way we can have helping hands for writing the test. The other points are, we can list, the QA team can list out the tools or the framework that can be used. For example, like web automation, they can take example of Selenium WebDriver, Playwright, or in case of JavaScript, it's Cypress or Playwright and Puppeteer and so on. So there are a lot of frameworks that are available. We can make use of any of the frameworks to use it under the hood and create a kind of wrapper around it. Only if it is a problem statement that it is going to solve for us. Then there are other things that can be discussed in the meeting with the whole team, is maybe what are the costs and the pros of the framework that we are going to use, and how does it solve the problem. And the most important thing that is overlooked at the time of creation of framework, maybe people consider it as well, but it comes at the later stage when there is a time to integrate the framework to the CI/CD pipeline. Now there comes a question, lo, I haven't checked this whether it works in the CI or not. Now again, if this it comes at the later stage, that is a kind of late feedback for us. We need to check these at the first instance, because at the end, the whole motto is to integrate the test in the CI/CD pipeline, right? And if the framework is not extensible or flexible to run the test using command line or in the CI pipeline, then it's a kind of a late feedback, and it might be a failure for the automation framework as a whole. So that also needs to be considered and discussed upon. And then the last point is, most of the time that we have seen is due to flexibility, or for the cloud platforms like browser stack, lambda test, there are a lot of platforms available in the market today. So these platforms offer a good types of real devices as well as web browsers with different versions, multiple OSs as well. So we can also make this framework extensible, whether it is extensible and flexible to be working with these cloud platform devices or not. So if there's a kind of a 4 or 5 different parallel sessions that we need to run on, we need to make sure that these platforms are actually supported by the whatever devices or browsers we are taking are supported by the cloud platforms, and this automation framework also supports this kind of cloud platforms or not. If not, we need to create a kind of a wrapper class or a helper methods to which may take care of all these things out there, right?
Correct.
Do you have any more points on that beyond this?
Mostly like companies should they normally what they do for development, they have designs created for their development. They have the all the architectural designs created. For example, if you uh, like for testing, they don't have any kind of such designs created. Like for UI, they will have some Figma designs. For overall architecture, they will have architectural design. For testing, they don't have such designs.
So are
They
you
are
talking
just
about
doing on the fly.
sorry
Now,
to
what
interrupt.
happens on the fly? At
I
the end,
Sorry to
yes,
interrupt, Vasik. I just wanted to know, like, are you discussing about design patterns here?
no. The what I'm topic talking is at the end, what happens is they implement a framework which is not thought through end to end.
Hmm.
Okay, what it got my point. They are creating a framework without any vision. So what happens? They will find some issues in CI. They'll face some issues while test execution. So their end-to-end flow they have not thought it through while creating the framework. So while creating the framework from end to end, you should know what will happen in your test scenario. for test execution. In CI, you will be executing in CI. So all these things you should know that you will be running on browser stack or Lambda test. You will be running on different scenario. You'll be running on parallel. You'll be running on web, API, mobile. All these they have to thought for first. They should create a flow diagram or something to understand the flow of the test, how the test will flow. Then they will create they'll be able to create proper framework out of it, because without any design or any vision and vision, you will at the end creating a blind spots in your future.
So maybe a kind of flowchart design may help here, where
Yes,
the
yes.
execution will
Because
start.
yeah, yes, how everything will go before starting to create any framework. You should have a blueprint in your mind, like
Mm.
how this framework will help in your each step of execution.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good point. I think people should follow actually using it, and
Yeah, actually, many people and most of the people overlook this. They just go with the flow. Let's start automating, and then we'll modify the framework according to our needs.
I
So, not
think
they go with the flow.
this
That's
comes
what
with
happens.
experience, Wasik. You might have faced this area as well. I remember you working on Cotis APM. You haven't thought any such of kind of a design in your
Yes.
mind, and then you failed gradually, and then you thought of creating a plan out there.
Gradually, I had to stop maintaining that project.
then then you thought of that creating a kind of a mind map. I remember we had a discussion
Yes.
around this. You created a kind of
So
mind map
that's
where
why
the
I created Boyka framework. Before creating Boyka framework, I created a mind map. What I
uh,
want this framework to do. Then I created a framework, and eventually it is shaping out in a good way. Like it is following the vision which I had all in my mind before starting. So that's how robust framework works, because you are having a clear picture in your mind how this framework will look at the end and what
yeah,
problems will it solve.
yeah, yeah. So coming to the next point, like before we start creating a framework, I think we should do a kind of proof of concepts on the tools that we are trying or we
Mm.
are decided to work upon or create a wrapper
Yeah,
around that, right?
yeah.
Because I remember in one of my previous experiences where I actually uh, suggested one framework. Don't remember that name. That was for performance. I didn't get chance to work on that project because after 15-20 days I was moved to some other project, and there was a tool I checked out for. I suggested for that tool, but then I got to know that in on GitHub that is no more continuously maintained. It was stale, and that was last commit that came on was around 6 months back. After that, no one has maintained that, and there's no contributor actively participating any of the commits there. So that my manager actually pointed that point out. Then I realized that I should have checked that as well, that whatever tool that I'm trying to use, that should be actively maintained and uh, should have the support at least available for the vulnerabilities or the security things that the industry is facing in this area as well. So that was a common point that I remember just now when we are talking about these things. So proof of concept is very much important. Even if you're using Selenium WebDriver, maybe APM or WebDriver IO, I think you should do a kind of a small POC around the major functionalities that that your application actually has. That will actually help us to know whether these features will be implemented using this tool, because at the end we are going to create a kind of wrapper around this tool only, and if that tool initially doesn't support that, we would be in a very problematic statement in the end when it comes like this is not actually working, this feature is not supported out there, or maybe this feature requires some sort of subscription to be applied there. So we should be doing a kind of POC around the tools that we are going to use under the hood for our automation framework. So Vasik, let's move next now towards the components of automation framework. So maybe you know more than me about the components of framework. So ideally, you can I would hand over the mic to you. You may please proceed on that.
So basically, when you talk about the components of the framework, you should normally it will start from configurations. So many companies like they prefer properties file. Some prefer like the JSON file. Accordingly, like they normally have the configurations. Now, this from this configuration point, like there's one more point which comes to my mind is there some companies what they do is they have scattered configurations. Like one configuration for mobile is separate, web as configuration is separate. Then there is different clutters are there. So you need to. I would recommend having a single configuration file that helps in better maintainability. Now comes to different other component is like the framework should be easy to use. So there, you cannot say that it is a component, but it is a part of implementation that you make sure that the framework is implemented in an easy way so that any team member can easily use that framework. And the other component is like maintainability. At the end of the day, the framework should be maintained. So you don't need to make the framework complex that it is pretty difficult to maintain. So, for example, if the creator of the framework leaves the company for any reason, there is other team members should be able to maintain that framework.
Mm.
So, like that, there are like runner. Mostly the what happens at the end, you will be executing your test some on some runner. For example, test ng, Cucumber, or JUnit. So that also you need to make sure that we are using proper runner which matches which aligns to the requirement of the framework. Like for example, we are focusing more on data driven. So testng is a good match because it
Mm.
supports data provider and all. Like that we need to make sure that we are using the tools which are aligning to the aim of the framework.
Yeah. The other points that came to my mind that you were just mentioning around the different components where like we need to have that logging also in place because
Yes,
that
I
gives
was
a
coming on that.
okay,
I
okay,
was
go ahead
coming
please.
on that. Like apart from these components, there will be logging. So you need to log all the events which happen. So it will be easy for the team to debug the issues if there is any issue, like what steps were executed in the test and how we can reproduce the issues. With logging, there is also a requirement for reporting.
Mm.
Another component is good reporting tool. Now there are plenty of tools already available in the market, which you can leverage in your framework. For example, report portal, LEO reports, extend reports, like those you can use. Or if some companies prefer to have customized set of data which they want to wish shown, so they can come up with their own reporting tool or the reporting UI. Like that, these things are there. And test data management is another thing. Most of the companies don't do test data management. There are some companies still using test data. So they prefer Excel to keep their test data. But ideally, test data should be avoided because at the end, what happens, it will become a hindrance in your test execution because the parallel test execution will become more flaky if you will use static test data or the test data which are used in different test cases. So, like test data management is another component.
Yeah. So for test
And
data management, I remember there's a library called Data Faker that can be used. So
yes,
ideally, when I started with automation, I used to create some test data using the data provider, and that was a static kind of thing. So what happened most of the time was once the data was used up in the application, then until and unless I had deleted that data from the system database, I was not able to use that, and the application used to throw an error mentioning that the data is duplicate. So then I remember that you suggesting me to use data faker library from Java, and initially using that so that we get a random set of data every time we run the test.
there is another tool called DB unit. I remember in one of my project, we were using DB unit to just dump out prerequisite data in the database, and then we executed our test. So that was pretty cool tool that help us in executing our test properly. Parallel execution is another component, another thing which you need to keep in mind. Like parallel execution, how many parallel threads you want to spawn together while you're running your test. So that is another thing which you need to keep in mind. And there is a cloud platform. Like you need to also identify on which cloud platform you will be running your tests, if at all you are using any cloud platform in the first place. So you need to also make sure, like, all these points are considered while designing the things. So all these things becomes your components basically. So you just build on top of that. And at the end, you need to be executing your test on CI. So CI is the last component. Like how will you execute your test on CI?
Hmm.
All these points you need to make sure that you are touching upon.
uh, from the design part, like I remember you in the earlier talk that we were doing, you mentioned around the design and the flowchart things, right? So in that consideration, I think the loose coupling thing also needs to be considered here, like your
Yes.
methods and the classes that you're using to create a wrappers should be loosely coupled. What's your take on that?
Yes. Yes, basically, there should not be interdependencies between the methods. So, if that is the case, it will be difficult while executing a test in parallel, because
Mhm.
this dependencies will become an hindrance in that.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about different things with regards to the components of framework. We talked about configuration. We talked about having the loose coupling between the different methods and classes, ease of use, maintainability, readability. Uh, then we talked about test data management as well, reporting, logging. Uh, I feel with regards to the framework, there are some concepts, like if you see a kind of a tool called WebDriver IO, it actually supports mobile as well as web. But when you talk
Hmm.
about Playwright, it supports API as well as web. So
Hmm.
in that case also, depending upon the problem statement that you are facing and trying to solve, you can create a single page or a single automation framework for catering the needs to mobile, web, and API testing as well. But unless and until it's a kind of a problem statement for you, then only you should go ahead with that. Otherwise, it would be like over engineering a product, over engineering a framework, and that would lead to some kind of issues, because it would be complicated to maintain and then move ahead with that as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on with regards to, like, if it's a test automation framework, it's a kind of a product for the QA team, and to make the product robust, I think that also needs to be tested, testing the testables basically.
Yes.
So what's your preference on that? How do you do that?
Basically, you should write you should write a unit test for your framework also, to make sure that whatever method you are exposing, it is working as expected.
Hmm.
So normally, like in the organization point of view, they don't write the tests for their framework. They directly write the test cases for the product which they are working on, and they test their framework against that product. So that happens, like, sometimes the test fails, and it gives like falsely, like it is showing that the product is buggy, but at the end there is a problem in the framework only. So product is not the issue, the framework is the issue.
Hmm.
So normally this happens, like, companies, they don't have unit test for their framework.
I feel
So that,
I feel this is coming from experience.
yes,
Coding
that's
से भी
why I
हम
normally make sure that every test, every framework which I work on in open source, I have unit tests in place.
correct, right?
And one thing I forgot to touch upon while talking the components, there is code linting is another thing which should be considered. Many companies, they don't give this much importance. Like everybody is writing the code in their own style, and at the end it is like a khichdi. What is written, the writer is knowing. The person does not know what is this.
ये राज भी उसके साथ चला गया kind of thing.
Yeah. There should be some uniformity in the writing style. So that's where check style kind of library helps to make sure that you are following proper naming convention. And there's Sonar Cloud also there, which will pick out the all the code smells from your framework and tell you that you are writing the code in a bad style. You should be optimizing your code in such a way that it is properly, there is no security threat in your code. That also needs to be un- understood,
Taken
thought
care
thought
of.
about.
Also about like assertions. Since test, writing a test and performing different clicks and pressing some buttons or keys is good, but unless and until you write a kind of assertions for the test, I don't feel the test is complete, right?
Yeah,
So
assertions is the heart of the testing. Without
correct.
assertion, you cannot tell that you are testing. You are just mocking the things.
Clicking the buttons. Yeah. So uh, another point, like assertions, how do you take care of those things? Like uh, if you perform some kind of API automation, then what all things do you consider as a part of assertions then?
This is a very broad topic. I think we can create a separate video out of these things, like testing approach. Testing
Exactly.
approach is something, people are not taking that seriously. That is where the test pyramid becomes a building, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's become an ice cream cone. So we can create a whole separate video out of this topic.
Exactly. So we'll definitely take a look at that. I think we can have another session for assertions as well. But the last
Mm.
point that I remember out of my painful experience is that I hardly have found any documentation for any framework, because whenever I went into any of the project out there, I was given a kind of a GitHub repository or a Bitbucket repository and told that this is the framework that we are following. You just need to write the test and run the test from it. Then the question came was, I actually started with the reverse engineering part. How do I run the test? How do I write the test? How do I make the page objects, or how do I interact with the elements in the page object? How do I locate the elements? How do I write the code that particular thing? And then I came to know that there are a lot of things that are undocumented, and the tests that are written are specific to some of the test cases only. When it comes to another features like switching a window, opening an iframe, working with alerts, working with iframes, working with different kind of messages, tooltips and so on, then there are a lot of things that needs to be taken care of or might be taken care of in the automation framework, but there's no documentation for it. So it's very much
The best
essential.
documentation which I found while working in such projects is look at the previous tests. You can
Yep.
see the tests and try to understand what this framework does. So that's the
but if there is
that's
a
the
test
approach.
but if there is a
Yeah,
test uh, that you need to write with regards to some kind of a functionality that has alerts or maybe switching to a window, and there's no previous test written for it, how do we make out for such test? There's no nothing
modify
you
the framework.
or you need to call that person who has created the framework. I remember calling you back when I was working with one of the company where you left and you had created one framework, then I had to, and then you mentioned, मैंने तो ये बनाया ही नहीं है. You will have to create that thing now. And then the documentation, I think, is an important thing we need to take care of. And if you can write a framework, why can't you write 2 lines to document the thing that you have written? Maybe write something with what that method does, or maybe how you import or you put that method to use. Maybe this kind of things, when summed up, can be created as a kind of a wiki page and help the other people who will be onboarded when you leave the company, or maybe when you leave the project, or maybe if you are there on the project, it might save your time and efforts by making the people sit beside you and helping them to understand the things that you have written. Instead, you can forward the link to them that this is the wiki page. It has all the details with regards to the methods as well as the framework design principles, architecture, or whatever component that you have written. It might help the other person as well. And I feel this is the best thing, because write once and read it anywhere. The principle helps everyone out there. Maybe if you leave the company also, then it can help someone who comes next to you, and he'll be able to write and understand the framework and run the test accordingly.
That's how that's why open source projects are pretty successful, because every open source project will have some kind of documentation. But when it comes to the organizations, this part is lagging behind. Like many frameworks, they have created for their project, but they don't have proper documentation in place. They just do a KT session and give the knowledge sharing and let's start writing the test case.
Yeah, and
That's
KT
what
session,
happened.
most of the time it happens is only the highlighted features is been explained. When it comes to in-depth thing and the problem statement arises, there are a lot of complexities that comes as an unknowns, and we need to sit back with that particular person who is actually providing the KT sessions, or maybe he needs to provide the time from his own pocket. Maybe
Mm.
after the office hours, he need to sit there, or maybe come early and sit with the team, and then accordingly work on his task, as well as make the team understand like these are the things we need to take care of in the framework, which actually creates a kind of burnout for that person and also for the team. Then this can be avoided if we can have a small documentation, piece of documentation in place, which can eventually initially we'll find some burnout things, but once the documentation is in place, it will make your life relax part in the upcoming days, right?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have any other points, Vasik, to discuss?
No, I think we have touched almost or every aspect of framework.
Cool.
Uh,
We will be coming up with some more useful and insightful videos in the upcoming days. Do keep watching to my channel, and please subscribe, and thank you for so much for watching. Thank you, Vasik.
Bye bye. Bye.